What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. Welcome back, Nightmare Success listeners. Hope everybody's having a good day. So we come here for, when you experience your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? I've got a really interesting guest because I was just telling Jason, it's Jason Safford, and I was just telling him, I've done a lot of interviews, but I've never done one with someone as recent as Jason coming out of prison. He's been out for 3 months out of federal prison. I first want to give a shout out to Mike Morosky, who was able to turn me on to Jason. And for those, Mike Morosky has a great interview of about 5 or 6 episodes back. Tell you a little bit about Jason Safford. He was just giving me a little education on green energy because he really was one of the pioneers getting into the green energy movement when no one really knew too much about it shortly after 9/11. But Jason's been a CEO. He's been a real estate investor. He's an author. He's a speaker. He's been an executive coach. He was CEO of Safflyn for 16 years and led the acquisition of development of more than $200 million in real estate. He's written books. He's written 3 of them. Think Green, The Future's Awesome, Sun, Sand, and Salt, Winning with Exceptionalism, and, reading and trying to understand how Jason got into prison. He'll explain it, but it sounds a little confusing. It sounds like there was a green development project that got all tangled up in New York, and in the end, it ended up where Jason had served some federal time. But very excited to get into all this. Before we do that, I want to welcome and recognize our sponsor, show of Auto Plaza Direct. Who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots looking for a car? Then you spend 4 to 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. Well, it's kind of like a trip to the dentist. Well, there's a better way to take away all the pain and hassle of getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They are your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they will go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price and deliver that car to you in any state. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Jason Safford, welcome in, my man.
Brent, thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
Well, I'm really happy that getting out of prison is, and you and I talked about this on the phone the other day. It's one of those weird things. People have asked me, what's it like to get out of prison? And I said, well, it was kind of like being 5 years old and going down and seeing all the presents and then times that by, thousands. But when you get out, reentry is not easy. Jason, what has your life been like since you returned? I want to get back into your story, but what you've been out for 3 months. What has that experience been like for you?
It's been a whirlwind. So the first thing is that, you leave prison and you're just happy to be leaving.
Yes.
For me, that day is so memorable because I walked out, I saw my wife who, came to pick me up, and I never looked back. And, it was sort of a superstition with the guys inside. And, let me just say that, for anybody who goes down,
mm-hmm.
I give them, all the credit in the world. When you make it out, your transformation, begins before you go in, and that time inside, you have to change.
Yeah.
And when you come out, you just don't want to even think about what you went through.
Right.
because you want to start over with a clean slate. And, the first thing was that, we had to get to the halfway house in a certain amount of time. So we didn't have a lot of time.
Which is scary, by the way, because if they tell you
correct.
that you can't get there in the amount of time, then that has consequences to it, and that's scary.
That's exactly right. And so you've lived, the entire time you're inside, you've lived by these very stringent rules, knowing the penalties and, really, trying to do your best to avoid getting shots or, having any types of altercations, just, as they say,
go into the hole.
You got to move, a certain way and just stay out of the way.
Yeah.
And so having, figured out how to do that, the challenge was now you're on the outside and you still have to do that, but you don't have anybody around you to explain that to.
Right.
And nobody understands. You're sort of on your own now.
Yeah.
To kind of explain to people, hey, I have certain boundaries that I have to stay within. And so I can't, join you or meet you anywhere. I can't do any of these things. And so for the first month I was at the halfway house and you had to learn their rules. And I was allowed to go home on weekends, which was great because I got to see my wife and kids. And that was the biggest thing for me, was being able to get back to reconnecting with them on a, consistent basis. And that was the first real challenge, was having to explain to my kids why I had to leave every Sunday evening to go back to the halfway house.
How old are your kids, Jason?
5 and 8.
Okay, so do they understand anything of how and what happened?
No, not really. And it's something that, I think, again, for every individual, you have to, figure out how you're going to work with your family and sort of, work through this. For me, I was very lucky. My wife, has been an incredibly, supportive, just outstanding partner who picked up the slack and, allowed me to do my best to parent from inside and then come back home and try to pick up what I could, however I could, and allowed me that space. And that's,
and I
don't think that often
and Jason, you and I talked a little bit about this on the phone. We were talking back and forth, but having a wife who, because, I was telling you about my wife, it came every weekend and she held it all together. The kids were teenagers, and the way she handled it, I think, gave them strength on how they handled it, because she was such a warrior and was such a good role model. And you had that. And, you and I were talking about it. It was so devastating to see guys that didn't have that, or if they had that coming in, they lost it during their time or when they got out. And that's a whole nother layer of reentry and doing your time, both.
Yeah. No, it's, you're absolutely, you hit on a hard subject, because, being as fortunate as I was, and, obviously you had that great, fortune, you really feel for the other guys, but you're also grateful for what you have. And for me, that was really sort of the main thing, was being able to reconnect with my wife and kids and put my time into them. And I had to figure out how to navigate that within the halfway house's limitations. So
Right.
They were restricting me. I couldn't just go and see them. And on top of that is that, you're only allowed out for a certain number of hours. And otherwise you're supposed to be doing this job search, but they don't give you, the ability to, even do a job search. And I was incredibly fortunate in that while I was inside, I found out about the Fortune Society. And I reached out to them and immediately was able to get a letter while I was inside that allowed me to go to them and get set up and start taking classes. So school is something that allows you to go outside the halfway house.
Right.
So the Fortune Society had a rehabilitation program to really help you with job interviewing skills and being prepared. You did a
how'd you find that, Jason?
In the library in prison, they have these books.
You researched it.
And I just did the research,
Okay.
and I found out. And, it was something where I just went old fashioned. I wrote a letter to the contact. I got a letter back, and it was terrific because they said, "Hey, listen, we can't guarantee you a job, but what we can guarantee you is that, you bring this letter to us, and we're going to do our best to try and find you a job." And they lived up to that. And so while I was at the halfway house using Fortune, I was able to then, find a way to get out of the halfway house, and have some support. And that's the other thing is that, unless you find these organizations, you have no support. So you're basically navigating your way outside, back into the world and society, and nobody's trying to help you.
Right. You're on an island.
And that's exactly right. And even the guys that you're with, the majority of them are dealing with their own battles. So they're not, any help to you. Whatever the camaraderie was when you were inside kind of fades away to a certain extent because everybody's got their own battle and their own challenge.
Yeah.
So, in my case, part of the challenge was I didn't know how to communicate anything to, my wife and family other than, hey, listen, just because I'm out doesn't mean that I'm really out of prison yet. I'm still in BOP custody, and you got to understand that they have no desire to make this easy for me.
I think that's a really hard thing for family and friends to understand. I remember when I came back, and I was at Leavenworth, and it was a 4.5-hour drive, and we had so much time to get there, and all my family and my kids and everybody were at our house. And all I could think about when I should have been thinking about how wonderful it was that everybody was there, it was how much time do I have to sit here, and then I'm going to a place that they say is one of the worst places to go, one of the worst halfway houses in the United States. How am I going to re-enter that? And you have all these things just swimming in your head, and you're really on, like you said it so well, Jason, you're on your own. You're in your own thoughts, and everybody around you is assuming that you are elated and excited, and you are. That's the weird part. You are. Right. And on the other half of you, or your other half of the brain is like, holy shit, I'm going into a halfway house and having to go re-enter again into a world that I don't know. Yeah.
And, the other part of it, too, is that you're excited, but you can't communicate to anybody the way that you used to.
Right.
There's this limitation that has been created because you've been down and you've been forced to humble yourself in a way that you're almost feeble in your communication now. And, I think where it really, really, is impactful, again, I'm in a big city in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
There's, thousands of people around you every minute of every day. And in my case, coming from, Lewisburg prison, and it was a camp, but it was a dense camp. There were a lot of people there. But there was a certain routine and a certain level of, expectation in terms of how you moved every day and, the things that were in place. Whereas you're now back in society with people who do whatever they want and please because this is a free country. And you're not prepared for that anymore.
You're not totally free yet either. That's the other weird part of it is you actually are roaming the world out there on a pass, and you're not totally free. Nobody knows that necessarily unless you've got an ankle bracelet on, you have shorts on. But you're roaming in the world under BOP custody in free society.
Right. And you're forced to be an observer. So you can't really act, and you're hesitant to do anything other than smile. You're careful not to get involved in any type of conflict or altercation or, even helping people simply because you don't want to draw attention to yourself, because if you have any infraction that you have any involvement with the law enforcement, you have to let the case manager know.
Yeah.
There's all these other things. There's these headaches. And on top of which, in my case, the additional factor for me was the fact that I've got a wife and kids that I need to get home to. So I'm even more hesitant to, invest in anything that could put any, negative
Right.
in my life. So I'm so much an observer. I'm literally standing on the trains, watching people, otherwise, just really doing my best not to, interact with people because I'm afraid of anything wrong happening. And then the next thing you know, I'm back in prison.
Yeah. And that's a big thought because there's a lot of guys that get that, there's so many things that they tell you can't do. A certain probation officer can send you back and, you see it. And,
Yeah.
it's
Well, and that's the other thing is that you hear the stories from other guys.
Exactly.
And that's what terrifies you is that you're, going back to the fact that, every guy kind of fades away in terms of their friendship is because now all of us are on our own islands, terrified, dealing with our own battles.
Such a good analogy too.
And we can't really, explain it to each other than what we know could happen as the worst possible thing. And, there are always those guys who, continue to be fearless and, more power to them. But for those of us who really, respect the impact of what our, damage caused, we look at it now from that impact and we don't ever want to have that impact again. We want to have a positive impact. And we're not able to do that until we're out of BOP custody.
Yep.
We simply have to be as low impact or no impact as possible. So, leading into the whole green analogy, that's where it started for me was, learning about low impact and no impact.
Exactly. Well, let's go back. Let's go back. Jason, how did you grow up? What was your world like as a kid, a teenager, parents and siblings and those type of things? What was going on in your world?
So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in a neighborhood called Park Slope, which when I was really little, it was called Park Slum. It was not a very well-respected or well-to-do neighborhood. My parents were probably one of the first families to be a part of gentrification of that neighborhood. And I also like to say that my generation was really the integration generation. I'm a Gen Xer. And in 1975, in Brooklyn, New York, I grew up with every, person of color you could imagine, every different dialect of language. We were a melting pot. And I went to school with lots of different kids of, different ethnicities and backgrounds and, race, creed, color, you name it. But I had a very, very loving family. Incredible when you think about it, from the standpoint of, all the challenges that, were faced during that time. And, my father was he had worked for the federal government and then in the early 80s, Reagan had gotten rid of a program that had to do with the Meals on Wheels and all of the community action type of stuff. And he wound up joining the MTA. He was the breadwinner. He was a very, very amazing person who, believed in us having as much exposure to life, as you could imagine. So we took lots of trips. We had a, beach house that was nothing more than a, bungalow on the sand that he had built with his father. Actually, he really built it on the foundation that his father had, created before that.
That's interesting.
Another
Did you have siblings, Jason?
I had one sister,
okay.
Yeah, and so we grew up together. We were a very insular family, the four of us, and we were very, very connected with the rest of our family.
Yeah.
So my father was in touch with all of his aunts and his brothers and sisters.
So that sounds like a great childhood. Did you play sports in high school?
I did. I was actually a three-sport athlete, a
Yeah.
standout, and also a musician, and had a lot of different talents. And that was one of my challenges in picking a college, was that I had to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up.
Yeah, exactly. Where did you go to college?
So I started at Oberlin.
Yeah.
And in Ohio, and part of the reason that I went there was because I got into the music conservatory as much as a regular school, and I was a tuba player. So I had sort of a very unique background, diversity, all of these different things, and I loved the campus. But my real motivation for going there was that it was the worst Division III school in athletics. And I thought that I could come to Oberlin and transform it into the top Division III, or even get it to Division II, move up, because of, just my dreams in my head.
Sure.
And very quickly, that dream came crashing down to reality. And I wound up transferring to NYU in New York. And going to the film school. While I was on the basketball team, they did not have a baseball team. And although their soccer team was competitive, after 1 year of playing soccer with NYU, I realized that I was better off sticking with focusing on film and kind of gearing down a little bit. So I played basketball, and I was a film student. And otherwise, I just really focused on trying to build, my professional career.
Well, I was reading in your background, Jason. Is that where the
Yeah.
MTV thing came into?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened was that I started, as a .com kid, and because of film school at that time, they were transferring from film to digital. And so because of that, I had learned Avid and wound up getting these great positions at different companies and, as internships. And then NYU actually hired me. They saw my resume and they saw that I was very good with technology. And so they hired me. And I wound up, doing a year and a half with them. And I was in the career services department, and at a career fair, I spoke to somebody from MTV. And they said, send over your resume. And the next thing I knew, I had a job at MTV, and I was in the what's called network operations. And so we were the guys that basically, helped get everything online.
That's a huge deal. I mean, would this have been in the 80s or 90s?
This was in the late 90s. So
Yeah.
99, 2000, that was where I was.
Yeah.
And that was where I came up with the inspiration for my first entrepreneurial venture, which was the idea of putting artists online. So long before there was ever Facebook or even MySpace, I had come up with this idea for artists to be able to put their portfolio online and then communicate and try and get jobs and sell themselves out there. And we would be the facilitator for them.
Sure.
So that was, I left MTV and I decided to, do that while I was moonlighting for another .com. And I wound up getting interest from a law firm called Cantor Fitzgerald. And their reason for taking an interview with me was that they loved the idea of the intellectual property. Mm-hmm. So, what we were doing was we were basically saying, okay, we're going to put you online. We're going to do everything to, help you promote yourself and get out there. And we're even going to try and facilitate deals for you. The deal is, rather than taking a lot of money for you or charging you, for this, we're going to be responsible for your intellectual property. So you're basically going to sign it over to us. We'll manage it for you because it's on our platform. And then as we do deals, we'll negotiate the contracts and help you with the long-term management of your intellectual property. Cantor Fitzgerald obviously is a big law firm with a huge intellectual property. They love the idea.
Yeah.
And so they were ready to invest.
It's almost like a turnkey situation for somebody that doesn't know anything about it.
That's exactly right. Basically, what I was doing was creating a way for artists to know that they have a back end, mm-hmm. and they could go out there and sell themselves. and just have a manager that really handles all of their back end, that they don't have to, deal with all that hassle. And at the same time, we're also going to promote you as well and let people know, hey, look, this person's profile is up here. We had all sorts of ideas of how to, help them monetize their content. But it was just the initial sort of onboarding that was, again, this was in 2000.
Yeah,
so
23 years ago.
World.
Yeah,
we didn't have cell phones that you could watch videos on or listen to podcasts back then.
I mean, the iPhone wasn't even born yet. That's 2007.
That's exactly right. So, unfortunately, the day that I was supposed to go in and actually consummate the deal with a private investment group that Cantor had put together, a plane flew through their window. It was 9/11. And it was something that, I'm very, grateful for in a way, because I'm here. I was supposed to be in that building on that day, but that particular morning, I was preparing for the, meeting. I was a young guy, thought I could stay up all night and prepare. And when I went to, get dressed and wait for the train, I wound up falling asleep at my desk.
Wow.
And I missed the train, and
otherwise you would have been in the meeting.
That's right. I would have been in the meeting, trying to close the deal, and a plane would have come through our window, because that was the World Trade Center. And so that was a very, very dramatic event for me. It changed my life. And
but an idea was born out of it.
An idea was born out of it, because, as I told you before, one of the advisors on my board that I had put together for the company was an older Jamaican man who had just retired from Pfizer. He had been one of their, very, very well-respected mechanical engineers. He was known for his safety record. He was just a great guy. He sat down with me and he basically said, okay, you lost your business. You don't have a job. You put a lot of money into this. What are you going to do now? And I said, well, there are all these displaced people in downtown Manhattan, and I thought I could help them by buying some shelves of, buildings and fixing them up in Brooklyn and putting some solar rooftops on them and giving them a better quality of life. He said, that's a great idea. Let's go into business. And I wasn't even ready for it, honestly. It was one of those things where I was like, wait, what? And he was like, I haven't heard an idea that good from anybody. And, I've listened to lots of business ideas, but that's something that I would be willing to do, because it's about changing people's lives and giving them a better quality of life. So I'm willing to go into business. And literally a month later, on October 11th, we were at the Queens Courthouse and incorporated Safflyn Corporation. It was a combination of my name, Safford, and his name, Lynn. So we put it together.
Safflyn.
And created Safflyn Corporation. Yeah. And then about a decade later, we created a second corporation called Safflyn Green Industries, because our success, and one of our biggest successes you brought up, was our job training program we had done with the city of New York. We were involved with the recovery. If you remember from the recession of 2008, there was this huge federal stimulus to help people recover and get back to work. And so the city of New York called us and said, hey, we've heard such great things about your organization in terms of, green. We'd like you to, put together a program with us. Would you be interested? And we had no idea what we were doing. I'll be very honest with you. So the first thing we did was...
I think you ended up training like 200 people, right?
Yeah, we wound up training 200 people. And what we did was we reached out to Sherwin-Williams. And we put together a program with Sherwin-Williams, our own solar program, another company called Intech 21, and OSHA. And we basically created this, a green jobs program where we were training people, making sure that they got OSHA certified, that they knew how to do cool roofs, that they knew how to do solar, both, solar electric as well as solar heating. And they also knew the technology to work with the thermostats and the remote sensors so that they could build systems, for buildings in New York.
Mm.
And it was a phenomenal program and had a huge success. And in addition to that 200 people that we trained, we wound up getting another contract with the Harlem Community of Congregation, or it was all the churches in Harlem. And we wound up giving them the training program so they could train people who were interested in.
That's
and this
awesome.
was beyond the reach of the city. It was just helping churches to get in on the action so that they could help people in their neighborhoods with learning this technology and learning how to
Teaching them a new trade. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So you go along there. I think you were there for 16 years, and the can you walk us into, because it sounds like your life, your world, and I'm assuming at this time, at some point, do you get married and that portion of it? Are you in that world when you're doing all this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so you had the reason why I think your story is fascinating is you have a lot of different things that you've done, Jason, that were made impacts. I mean, you were in the MTV company when MTV was really a cutting edge cultural center of what was going on with a generation. You actually got into green energy. And you gave me a little, before we got on, you gave a little background on what your dad was doing, and you kind of got interested as a youngster. But you saw that opportunity and jumped into it. So these different things that you were doing, you were taking little pieces of what your background was and kept jumping and taking your entrepreneurship to new heights. How did you get into your nightmare?
Yeah. So that's always the great question. And it starts with the fact that my business partner and I were very, very close. We formed an incredible bond, beginning with when we went into business, because when we shook hands on the steps of the courthouse in October of 2001, I told him that for me, doing business with him had to be based on three principles. And those three principles were honesty, integrity, and enthusiasm. We had to be honest with each other at all times. It was all about our integrity with each other, and we had to have fun. We had to love what we were doing.
Yeah.
If those principles weren't there, it was time to end the company.
I like that a lot.
And we drove that, towards our customers and our people, everybody who worked for us. We basically made them understand that we live by these three principles. So, yes, I got married, to my friend from college, ironically, the one who, called me the morning of 9/11. Years later, we wound up getting, married. Wow. And during that time, she was, very successful with her career while I was, developing this company. And in 2007, right before the financial crisis, my partner and I decided to make our big move. We were having success. We were doing lots of different projects, here in New York, Long Island. We also had done some successful projects in California, Hawaii, and Texas, and Florida. But we were really starting to grow. Mm-hmm. And we decided we're going to put all our, effort into building our own development to create a model community for the world to see. Okay. It was time. We had success. We had, lots of great reviews. We were, government contractors on top of everything else.
You were known.
And then the financial crisis hits. Yeah. Then the financial crisis hits right after we buy our big deal. Yeah. So we bought this huge 330-acre property in upstate New York that had this incredible history. There was a castle on it, first of all, that President Theodore Roosevelt, President James Monroe, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt had all stayed in. Wow. On top of that, Theodore Roosevelt's family was married into the family that owned the castle. So his sister and he grew up as kids visiting this property when they were little. And it makes sense because Theodore Roosevelt had asthma. And so when they sent him out of the city during the summers, this is where he went. So this is the long lost story that nobody knows, right? His sister wound up marrying the son of the owners of the property, and that son, whose name was Douglas Robinson, wound up becoming Theodore Roosevelt's sparring partner in learning how to box.
Wow.
So when he became that successful boxer on the Harvard boxing team, a lot of it had been on this property where he learned.
That's wild.
So it was this incredible history. And then on top of that, there was this mansion that had been built by a famous Russian cellist named Rostropovich. And I actually knew of Rostropovich because I was a tuba player who went to the Oberlin Conservatory. And, so there's this incredible history. So now we're trying to develop it into a green community. We're trying to build greenhouses that are not just, solar on top, but every aspect of the house is built sustainably and carbon neutral. And this is back in 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part of it was that we had a deal with a wind power company that they were going to put wind turbines on the property. So in addition to the solar power, we would have wind. We would be getting a payment from this wind company. And the people who lived in the houses on the property would be buying that electricity, but because of their solar, there would basically be it would be net zero charges at the end of the day.
Wow.
But at least that way we're actually trying to produce energy and put it into the grid.
Yeah.
So the idea was creating a community that was actually not only just sustainable in terms of their living, but sustainable in terms of their economics. And the equity would grow because now you have a profit center from the energy as well as the equity in your home.
Right. Makes sense.
The financial crisis happens in 2008. We basically go into crisis mode and we have to figure out how we're going to survive with, all these different projects we had going outside of this property we're trying to develop. So we started doing concerts and festivals and anything we could figure out how to bring money onto the property to pay the bills while we're divesting ourselves of other projects that are underwater.
Mm-hmm.
And we made it through, and we got to the contract with the the contract with the city government to do green jobs in 2010. And our concert business actually flourishes in 2011 and 12. But then the promoter we were working with didn't pay us, and we had to chase him, and all of a sudden, everything's going awry. And I stepped back, and I told my partner, I said, look, we've had a lot of fun, but we have to focus on this development. Nothing's getting done in terms of our core philosophy, our core, focus. So this is when we, opened the new company, Safflyn Green Industries. And the idea behind Safflyn Green Industries was that now we're saying, okay, we want to really build this model of community, focusing on helping people integrate technology with the environment. And so therefore, this idea of building isn't just about what we want to do. We want to find companies that have that focus and bring them onto the property, and they build it.
Okay.
So it's no longer our idea. We're trying to get
You're
other
blending
people.
in a collaboration of people.
Blending,
okay.
That's exactly. We're trying to collaborate. And we actually got very, very powerful interest throughout the state. We started attracting a lot of people. And unfortunately, there was a change in leadership at the state level. And, now we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of the things that we thought were going to come to pass and businesses were going to come on the property, it gets delayed, and a big part of that was the shift from Obama to Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so everything that we thought was going to happen with that leadership now changes, and we're in trouble again. And we went through the financial crisis, and now this is 8 years later in 2016. And the reality is that I'm burnt out.
Yeah.
My business partner is even more burnt out because he's actually 33 years older than me.
Okay.
So it's one of those things where we're sort of at the end of our rope. And, I just had my first son born in 2015. I'm looking at the rest of my opportunities. I had the book, Think Green. I was teaching at NYU.
Mm-hmm.
I had a number of different things going on. And I'm saying, you know what? Maybe this is time to just accept that we failed. And my business,
which is hard. I mean, that's a hard thing to do. Yeah,
absolutely. And this was my baby. I'm not going to lie that, I didn't have an incredible amount invested into it just in terms of my passion.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to my business partner. He came to me and he said, listen, we have a responsibility to our investors who are, friends and family, to try and make this work, because otherwise they lose everything. And he had a lot of guilt around that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never imagined that I would be in this situation, but because of my loyalty to him and my belief that we could, overcome any situation based on what we'd been through, we started engaging people that knew how to maneuver within the banking system without doing everything that you needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I basically went to my business partner and said, hey, look, there's a way that we can get the money to refinance this property, but there's also a chance that we could go to prison because it's not 100% kosher.
So you actually felt that and knew that feeling at the time. Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah. I had never done anything to really, break the law, to really go past the boundaries like that in my life other than speeding.
But you were drifting into the gray area.
And we were in the gray area. And it was something where, I always let all of the bankers and brokers and everybody know, hey, listen, this is a non-performing asset.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the only thing that we could go for was a hard money loan.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality was that we didn't have the money to come up with the cost to close on a hard money loan. So we basically had to, finagle, as they say, manufacture documents. That's exactly what I said to the court. And my business partner just said, do whatever it takes. We've got to get this done. And, my belief in him and my belief in myself, the strategy was that we were going to get this money, we were going to fix up the property, and we were going to then sell it back to another investor or somebody else. Well, we got the loan done. It was completed. It was a nightmare success story in itself because just figuring out how to, get through those rings and, make it work was, a story in and of itself, but everybody was collaborating. As soon as my business partner signed for the loan, he turned around and said, F you, give me the money. And I was the financial officer of the company, and I had to say, hey, wait a second. We just broke the law in order to get this money. The last thing I'm going to do is let you take the money and run, because now everybody will know what we did. So I then had to stop him, and he wound up suing me. There was an agreement at first that I was going to buy him out, but I told him I can't buy him out with the money we just borrowed. I have to find other money to do that. And the only way that I was going to do that was to fix up the property and tell another investor, hey, I'm fixing up this property. I need you to buy it, but I also need you to buy out my investor.
Mm-hmm.
My partner, if I can stay with this property. This is one of those things where it's like, look,
it's just spiraling, right?
Yeah, I can't manage anything more than, what I have in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm, if you can imagine, I was literally driving upstate every week, 4 hours back and forth to work on the property while I had, a newborn or a 2-year-old, by that time, 1.5, 2-year-old, and managing all these different things in my life while having to deal now with a lawsuit and trying to figure out how to navigate that lawsuit with a partner who my love and affection for this person, he was supposed to be my mentor for, all this time. And now all of a sudden he's acting like I'm the worst person in the world. because I won't give him the money that he thinks he's entitled to, when the truth is he's not entitled to a dime.
Yeah.
You know, and so trying to manage that situation.
Well, partner lawsuits are the worst.
Yeah, I don't know how I made it through it, but I got to a point where I found a solar developer who was willing to come in and develop the solar energy on the property. Because again, there's 330 acres. So they would lease a certain amount of land from us and pay us to generate that solar energy. Well, that lease was going to cover the bank, the investors, my partner, everything. So I get this lease signed, and literally 2 months later, the feds arrest me. And they say, you're not allowed to do any financial transactions with this property. You've been,
you've been tagged,
arrested for
targeted.
bank fraud.
Yep.
Yeah. You're arrested for bank fraud, and, you're basically going to have to deal with this now. And so, my world came crashing down, and
what was going through your mind at that time, Jason? Because you've been really, I'm thinking about this story you're telling me. You've been in a battle since 2007, basically trying to one, and then you get over it, and then one, you get over it, and now you've got to deal with the partnership. So what were you thinking? What was going into your thought process at that moment?
I was completely devastated.
Yeah.
I was completely devastated.
And worn out.
The morning that they woke me up and came and arrested me, I was home with my children. My wife had just gone on a business trip. And fortunately, we had an au pair with us.
Okay.
So what happened was they came to arrest me. And I said, hey, listen, can I change and let the au pair know? Because now my son can't go to school. Because
right.
She has to watch the kids.
Yeah.
And, they brought me in the house, allowed me to change, and then rearrested me in front of my 1.5-year-old, which was devastating in my mind. But on that ride to first their office where they questioned me, and that was a whole thing in itself. The questioning was absolutely a setup to see if, I was going to snitch on a bunch of other people or what else was going on. It was just absolutely amazing, what a sort of fiasco it was.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought that maybe I was going to tell on myself. And I kept asking, where's my lawyer?
Right.
Obviously I need to have a lawyer. But on that ride, I basically knew that it was over.
Yeah.
And there was a sense of not relief, but acceptance that I had put everything I could into this, and this was the reality.
Mm-hmm.
That I had put it all on the line. In other words,
everything
when I made that decision with my business partner to cross the line, I knew I was crossing it.
Yeah.
And I basically put all of my effort for the next 3 years into doing my best to make sure that we were successful. And I just accepted that I failed.
Yeah.
And so that drive, sitting down, I was actually talking to both the agents. They were very nice to me in the car on the way to the Brooklyn courthouse. And I basically just realized that my life was over as it was. I basically had to accept this. My first most important thing was dealing with my wife. How was I going to explain this to my wife, and what was going to be a reaction? And so there was the real fear. My fear wasn't at that point about going to prison. My fear was about, whether or not my wife was going to stay with me.
Had you shared any of it with her, Jason, at that time when you were dealing with all of it in the last 2 or 3 years? No. Okay.
No,
so you were kind of living your own world, doing your own thing with how you were handling the transactions in that business.
Nobody knew except for my business partner and I what had really gone on.
Yeah.
I had lived with that my whole life, or during that whole time, I should say, not my whole life, but that whole time. And yeah, it had eaten away at me for a very, very long time. And I wound up having to get court-ordered therapy, mental health treatment,
mm-hmm.
because as I went into it and really realized, and then, here was the other thing, was that I didn't really think about the fact that it was my business partner who turned me into the feds until after I met with my lawyer.
After it all unraveled.
Walked through everything, and we sort of explored what were my defenses.
Yeah.
And whether or not, because I told her right up front, yeah, I did this.
Mm-hmm.
It's done in the real estate world all the time. Everybody changes the numbers in order to get their deal done.
Mm-hmm.
And, she was like, really? I was like, yes, this is not an uncommon thing. Donald Trump did it with, plenty of properties in order to get the appraisals that he wanted, because that was what I did. I changed the appraisal number.
Right.
In order to convince the bank that, this
to give you the
property
amount of
was
loan you
worth it.
needed. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And because it's so rampant, it was our safety valve in a sense when we got into trouble. This was always known that it could be done. I never wanted to go there, but because it was so common, it was something that people knew. You could always do this. There's always somebody who's willing to help you. And once I sat down with my attorney and she and I had that conversation, he was the one who kind of was just like, well, why aren't we, directing them towards your partner?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any documentation or anything that shows that, he was really in charge of all this? Because basically what he did was he said, I don't know anything. This guy just took the money and I was clueless as to what I was signing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can believe that, I mean, from a guy who, had lived his entire life being on top of everything that he had ever done.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, so you're saying that I took advantage of a senile old man? No. So it was the furthest thing from the truth, number one. But number two is the fact that now I basically have to deal with the fact that my loyalty to this person is now a challenge because my wife and children really are supposed to be the primary focus of my life.
Yeah.
And, how do I navigate this, with the federal justice system when they're basically siding with my business partner
mm-hmm.
and saying, well, you're the worst person in the world.
Mm-hmm.
As we all know, as soon as they come down on you,
the narrative's set.
The narrative's already set that you're worse than Hades.
Yeah.
So,
how did your wife handle because I know obviously that she stayed with you and was a great support and all that. How did you break that to her, and how did that world work for you?
As soon as she came home, we had the conversation right away.
Yeah.
And I shared everything with her, and I basically said, look, I've lived with this for the last 3 years. I'm, absolutely devastated that I, never shared it with you, but, I never wanted you involved. She was clueless as to, everything. She had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And, she took it like a rock. That's all I can tell you. That, she was very, very angry with me. Furious is probably a better word. But, after maybe a couple of days, she said, okay, we're going to figure out how to get through this.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to navigate it. Now, at that time, we did not know whether or not I was going to, even be sentenced to anything because, I hadn't even had a conversation with my lawyer yet. And once I had the conversation with my lawyer, and that was the other thing, was that I was arrested in Brooklyn and then my case was up in Syracuse. So there was like this whole navigation that we had to go back and forth, and I'm released on bond, and then COVID hit.
Mm.
And so now we're on home confinement, whether we like it or not, because of COVID. Forget about the federal justice system, but we're all locked down. So now I'm spending every waking moment with my family while I'm dealing with this nightmare.
Wow.
And I had to change my life at that point. And, on top of the fact that I could no longer do any type of financial transactions with that particular business. So I decided, okay, I've got to figure out something to do that, if I go to prison, when I come out, I can continue to do that.
Sure.
And so the first thing I did was I started working on the book, Winning with Exceptionalism, because I had a sit down with one of my oldest mentors going back to when I was in college, a guy named Dr. Ed Rogoff, who he was the head of the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College. And I met him when I started my first business venture. through the small business development centers. And, he had tracked me all this time. And he basically, sat down with me and he was like, listen, Jason, you have always done everything at an exceptional level. And, green is great, but that's not what people want to learn from you. What they want to learn is how you continue to do things at an exceptional level. And so I said, okay, well, let me figure out how to write a book on that and see if, that will be something.
That's what I found intriguing about you, Jason, was when I started looking into your story, that's actually what, it wasn't what was, Green Pioneer. It was the ability to take an idea, take the action, take the risk, and grow something, and use it. And because we were just talking before we got on here that a lot of people have ideas. It's actually the implementation of the ideas and sticking with the idea to make it go.
Yeah. That's a great point. Thank you for that. And it's something that I have the entrepreneurial spirit. That's the one thing that I think has always terrified my wife. That I love to explore ideas and see how we can implement them. And and just a little side story that goes to green. But during the time of COVID, the one skill that I did develop besides writing a book was I wound up becoming a gardener and planting our garden, because it's very much the same thing of planting seeds and caring for things and watching them grow, and then learning how to weed and to harvest, in the right times of everything. So it's very much like building a business, whether you believe it or not.
Sure, I would totally agree with that.
It's working with the environment, and the other reason I did it was because it was a great way to teach my kids.
Sure.
So it was incredible interaction with them, from the fact that we started with speaking to the seeds and the small plants. We would basically talk to them every morning, say good morning, say great things to them. And then when they got big enough, we then planted them in the backyard and continued to water, and nurture them.
And the pandemic world,
That's right. And we go into the backyard and we say, look at our beautiful garden.
Yeah.
Good morning garden, good evening garden.
So how long did all that last for you? By the time they came and surprisingly, they're at your doorstep, they take you in, and you get your attorney to your standing with your plea agreement. What was the time period in that?
18 months.
Okay.
So I got arrested in December of 2019. I was finally sentenced on October 28th, 2021, and they remanded me right out of courthouse.
Oh my!
Into Oneida County Correctional Facility.
And that that's something that always because there's absolutely nothing. There's no way that you can know. That did not happen to me. But I was just talking to Seth Williams the other day, who was the district attorney of Philadelphia, and he actually went to trial. In the middle of the trial, they came to a settlement, and he believed that he explained why he did what he did with the kids and all of the different things he was looking at. And so he assumed he was going to leave the court after the settlement and go home and, figure out how long, he was going to be until they told him what prison he was going to. And they remanded him immediately. What can you explain to me how that felt? Because I can't imagine, because the feeling of going into that world of being sentenced is on a scale that isn't known anyway. But then them immediately remanding you, what in the world were you thinking?
That day will live in infamy for me, because the first thing was trying to be as stoic as possible for my family.
Yep.
My father was there. My wife was there. We had left the kids home. My business partner was there. And then you have the hecklers from the AUSA side. And in my case, it was a bunch of jokers that, didn't have any claim or any real reason other than, I guess they wanted to see me fail as a part of it. And that to me was the circus that the Justice Department puts on, that I think is another fiasco in itself.
Well, it's like I always think it's kind of like the old Braveheart scene when William Wallace gets pulled into they finally capture him, and everybody
Yeah,
comes in and gathers around and they look and watch them pull this man apart, and
right.
it's the town
That's it.
square.
You're 100% right, because the AUSA, truthfully, is, and this is the attorney that I had been a former AUSA, and she sort of navigated a lot of this for me. So, if anything, what she really did for the 18 months that I had her was she helped me mentally prepare for what was going to happen. She was very straightforward. These are your options. If we go this way, this is what you're facing. If we go this way, this is what you're facing.
Mm-hmm.
She basically said, look, your best chance is to lay down right away.
Yeah.
And she was like, it's not your only option, but it's your best chance in terms of limiting the amount of time that you're away from your wife and kids.
Right.
And I, at that point, I was totally focused on my wife and kids, are going to suffer, for this, whether I like it or not. So the best thing that I can do, the best choice I can make, is to limit the amount of suffering that I'm going to cause to them.
Yep.
And so therefore, I didn't even hesitate to make sure that my first thing was, okay, I'm going to lay down and I'm going to cooperate and do my best to, make this as low impact as possible.
How long were you in the detention center when you were immediately remanded?
8.5 weeks.
Wow. It's a long time. But, I guess, the only thing that I can say that could possibly be positive from that is that's the worst and prison is better.
Yeah, you're 100% right, because I ate, rancid applesauce and cold bologna for pretty much 8.5 weeks.
Yeah.
But I got in the best shape of my life, because all I had, was basically I was stuck in a cell because it was COVID again. We weren't allowed out that much. So
anyway.
basically I was exercising, I was reading the Bible, and otherwise, I wound up finally getting supplies and I could write.
Yeah.
And so I was writing my wife and my kids, every week, and I started writing them stories. And that was my way of parenting, was that I would write them a letter and I would write them a story. And, very much in the style of Aesop's fables, I came up with all of these different, stories with morals to help them sort of like think about things using different animals. And that became my, therapy.
That was your world.
Yeah. And it was very small. It became very, very, concentric around, my wife and children and my father. And, I did have the good fortune of other people writing into me and contacting me. But yeah, at that point, my devastation was for my family. When I was arrested in court and they remanded me and took me out, that's a whole, fiasco in itself, is that you go up to the judge's bench.
Mm-hmm.
And here was the one thing that for me, I was like so thankful for, was that the judge actually really did not want to put me in prison.
Mm-hmm.
I had written a letter, and I'd, say this to everybody, that, Michael Santos, the one thing that, I got from him was that write a letter to the judge. He recommended that. And my lawyer was against it until I said, no, this is something that I need to do. I want to make sure he understands that I'm not running from this.
Right. And you're a real person, not the narrative.
Right. Right. And that, there was a real objective here. And this wasn't just me taking money and freewheeling and doing whatever I wanted with it. But my goal was to actually, build this community, help the region from an economic development standpoint, and really change, because this was in central New York, where it's economically depressed. And he loved the letter. He gave me an extra 90 days to try and get a deal done with the solar company, so that we could, consummate this, so that everybody could get paid, because then, really it's no big deal.
Yeah.
And the AUSA would not let me sign the deal. So when I'm standing at the sentencing on October 28th, I'm standing knowing that this judge can give me as much as 11 years, because that was the max that, the AUSA was recommending. but he could give me as little as 2 years, which was just the mandatory for the the one charge
For the charge,
that
yeah.
was totally bogus.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wound up having 3 charges. Bank fraud was really the only one that was a legitimate charge.
Mm-hmm.
The others were what you call trumped up charges that the feds just threw in there so that they could guarantee their victory.
Well, and they stack. It's also an intimidation of stacking
to hold you over a barrel. That's right. And threat, duress, and coercion are exactly what they use. And then they have you sign that paper saying that you didn't sign under threat, duress, and coercion. It's like, well, I'm facing so much time. What? That's not a threat. So you're standing there at that moment, and I gave this very, very deep-hearted speech about the fact that the real victims in this case were my children,
mm-hmm.
were the 2 little boys that were going to suffer without their father.
Mm-hmm.
And so the judge gave me, the mandatory 2 he didn't have a choice over. He gave me 12 months for the bank fraud and 12 months for the attempted wire fraud,
mm-hmm.
trumped up charge.
Mm-hmm.
So I was facing 4 years, and my lawyer said, "Listen, you can appeal this if you want to, but this is actually probably as good as we're going to get. And you're really, really, fortunate because it could have been a lot worse." And she's trying to convince me. And I'm already saying to myself, in my mind, thank God it's not more time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank God it's only 4. But at the same time, my second thought is, how is my wife, my father, who was 86 at the time, and my 2 children, how are they going to deal for the next 4 years without me?
Mm-hmm.
And so, when they took me into the jail cell, before they even moved me to Oneida, they put you in the jail cell in the courthouse. I just sat there, and they were like, don't hang yourself, you'll get through this, it'll be okay. And I'm like, I'm not thinking of killing myself. I'm just sad for my family.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just devastated for them because now they are going to prison for 4 years.
Yeah.
And when I got to the prison, the funny thing about it was, by that point, I don't know whether I was just loopy or what, but I wound up making jokes with all the prison officers once I got inside, because they have to take you out of your clothes. They do the whole
prisonize you. Yeah.
Right. And, I decided that, I was going to have fun with this. So, at first, he put on the clothes and I said, well, they're not baggy enough. I don't look stylish. And the guy was like, I haven't heard that one before. So he cracks up. And then the second thing was, I started looking, he was like, what's wrong? And I was just like, well, they say orange is the new black and I'm still white. And he busted out laughing and he was just like, oh my God, you made my day. We don't usually have people that are like,
no, usually completely petrified, paralyzed.
Right. And I was like, dude, I'm not happy to be here, but at the same time, I might as well, make the best of it and have fun with you guys because you're my,
so the whole time that you were in, Jason, was COVID and the restrictions of COVID while you were in?
Yeah. So I went in October of 21, October 28th, 21, and they lifted restrictions for COVID probably somewhere the next summer.
Okay.
Somewhere, between the next summer and the next fall. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
But they were still, let's put it this way.
But did you have visiting rights? You didn't have visiting rights during COVID restrictions, did you? Or did you?
Right. So when I was at the county facility, it was behind a glass. So we could have visitors.
Okay.
So my wife came and visited. And then at my first prison camp was Otisville. And again, it was behind a plastic curtain. So we did get some visiting.
Okay.
But then when I went to Lewisburg, because I went into the RDAP program, I got transferred to Lewisburg because that was where the closest RDAP was.
Right.
They did not have visiting for the first couple of months. And then they opened up the visiting in the late spring, early summer. So that was the first time my father got to see me. And then my wife came, and then she came with the kids. And, there was a level of comfort there because they actually had a reasonably good visiting center
area.
Where the kids they had a space for the kids. And Lewisburg actually had a patio. And this is where I must say I was grateful to the officers because they allowed my kids, who are incredibly hyperactive and need to move around.
Yeah.
they allowed them to go out there and we would just play every time. And that made all the difference
I
in the
bet.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your life like inside?
So I developed a routine from, probably I would say the first week. After the first week, I went to the mental health person. And, because it had been court ordered and I wanted to continue it because I found a great value in speaking to someone. I went to her and I said, listen, I'm going to go crazy in here unless I have something, to write with. Because if I can write, and otherwise I'll just read, the Bible, that's fine. But if I can write to my wife, my, kids, my father, I need this. This is really important for me. And she was like, yeah, sure, we'll help you with that. And so I started figuring out on a daily basis how my day was going to go based on, when the guards walked around, when the first count was, and then, we were basically, they woke me up every morning at 3:00 in the morning with their keys walking by.
Sure.
So I'd wake up.
That gives you a little bit PTSD nowadays, doesn't it? Hearing keys
absolutely.
jangle.
Yep. Yeah. So I started my day at 3 in the morning, and I would basically exercise and write. And then first meal would come around, and and I do this whole routine throughout the whole day. Basically meal would come, exercise, write. Meal would come, exercise, write. And, that, kept me going. And then when I got to Otisville, by that point, I had become really, really sort of focused on my, journaling and everything else. And the guys at Otisville, basically saw me as a writer. We wound up starting this creative writing group. We had a bunch of people in it. It was terrific. It was great therapy. And then on top of that, we had our exercise and we had our whole navigation, because now you're out, you're moving around, and, you're basically functioning as a person in a camp. And you're limited. You can't leave the camp, but at least you have that interaction and,
Sure.
The food is better.
Yeah.
It's not great, crappy prison food, but it's better than, rancid applesauce and
Exactly.
cold bologna. And then when I got to Lewisburg, by this time now I've got this whole routine, and Lewisburg was a completely different animal, but I very quickly established myself as sort of, I had my little corner. I stayed in the library. I did my writing every day. I did my working out, and otherwise I wound up becoming a teacher, helping guys with their GED, and I also was teaching CDL and how to write a book class. And I helped more than 100 guys be able to take the CDL exam for their permit and pass it successfully. And so that was, my.
Well, that
my
really had
privilege.
to eat up your time. That's the biggest. The biggest thing I found was, I had 2 good jobs in prison, and it really ate up my time, and the rest of my time was working out and reading.
Enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah, time is your number one enemy, and that's what.
And what I think is also kind of twisted, interesting is that you had 3 stages. You had the COVID lockdown, then you went and remanded to the detention center, and then you went to prison. But all 3 of those, you were locked down, and it was different versions of having, your freedom restricted.
Yeah,
interesting.
Absolutely, you're right about that. Yeah.
So when you get through this whole process, and it sounds like, you didn't waste time when you were in there, because I always say there's this line in that Shawshank Redemption: we get busy living, get busy dying. There's only 2 types of prisoners a way to do your time. There's, you either give up, go in the corner and get in a fetal position, or you just figure it out. And you figure out how to adapt, figure out how you're going to make this work, and maybe you plan for how you're going to get out. But what were your thoughts as you got closer to knowing that you were getting out?
Yeah. Before I say that, I got to give a big shout out to Mike Morawski as well, because he was the one who really helped me, because he was just coming out when I was preparing to go in.
Interesting.
And so I was coaching him. So going back to the story of winning with exceptionalism, I wrote the book.
Yeah.
And I wound up starting an online coaching business because we were locked down.
Yeah. And
coaching people on their business dealing with COVID and sharing my book with them. And Mike was one of my clients. And Mike couldn't pay because he was just out of prison, and he's just like, listen, I want to work with you, but I don't have the funds. And I said, well, listen, you just came out of prison. You coach me on what I need to
exactly,
be prepared for, and I'll give you all the coaching you need to be successful.
Perfect.
And it was a great relationship. And so Mike prepared me completely. And so I attacked prison because the number one thing that he made me realize was that time is your real enemy.
Yeah, exactly.
Forget about everything else. It's all about time.
Yeah.
And so if you can kill time every day by doing the things that you need to do to, be productive and successful and win your day, then you're going to be able to get through it with no problem whatsoever. So to your point, now I graduate RDAP and I'm thinking that I'm going home, and the case manager is basically holding me up with this bull about, oh, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, I've got FSA credits and I've got RDAP. And based on my time, I should be in halfway house right now. And, she keeps holding me up even though other people are
getting out.
And so my wife is planning, because she's dealing with her stuff, and she's planning on when is this going to happen. And we have to wind up fighting with the regional office and everything else. And so it became even more of a battle, in terms of my time, because I had my routine and everything else, and I'm helping all these other people. But now I got to focus on how the hell do I get out of this? I got to
get out of here.
Place?
Right.
Yeah. So, so by the last couple of weeks, I had it in my head, the song, We Got to Get Out of This Place.
Yeah.
And literally became my mantra. And, so the day hit. And like I said, I didn't look back. I just focused on getting forward. And my wife and I had this incredible conversation all the way to the halfway house, 4 hours. And, and then I'm here. And it's like, okay, I got out of here. Now what?
Yeah.
I got to learn the whole system with the halfway house. I got to figure out how I'm going to navigate. And then the city's changed on top of that. I've been away for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And they're not in COVID lockdown anymore. And so everything is, hustle, bustle, chaos.
Yeah, you're jumping into a moving car trying to get back into society, basically.
That's exactly right. And it's not going slow either. It's
No.
accelerating as you're closing the door. And it's like, well, where are we going? Don't worry about it. Just keep your feet on the floor.
So Jason, because one thing they can't take is your mind, and you've got a brilliant mind and have used it over the course of your years in your journey. What do you see yourself doing as you get along on your next journey here?
Oh, that's a great question. So I have been fortunate enough, and I'm so grateful that I got to, start a job at UFC Gym as a coach. And, because I was doing online coaching before, this is now, sort of a step back getting into the real world. And I love it. I love the gym. I love the people. But most of all, I love the opportunity to really help people.
Yeah.
With their health and fitness. And I have a whole philosophy now. My next book coming out is going to be called Win Your Day. And
I love
really
that.
Around the 10 habits that I developed from the time I was arrested until now that have kept me, in this highly
to win your day.
State.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's all about, if you can do these things to master yourself on a daily basis, you will see productivity you could never imagine any other way. And, they're simple habits. I mean, the number one thing was waking up early.
Mm-hmm.
I got to the point where, I woke up before the guards came.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, I wake up on my own at 4:30 in the morning, and I'm, lucky to have kids that now want to work out with me in our home gym. And then I come to work and work with people here. And so it's those 10 habits, but it's basically, I integrate the stories of myself and others, in, what happened to, help me really understand how to win your day.
Mm-hmm.
And, I believe it or not, I still have the property upstate. After everything is said and done,
that's crazy.
I'm still going to develop the property. And I found a few investors that I hope, we're starting with tiny homes.
Mm-hmm.
So we're taking a completely different angle now.
Yeah, but still using the property.
So we're still using the property, and our focus is to, get back to the solar and other things. But tiny homes is a huge movement now.
Mm-hmm.
And I found, a salesperson who has got really excited and brought some investors to the table. And so it's like, well, listen, let's start with,
Yeah.
people who want to get away from the hubbub, and exciting life of the city and really just connect with nature. And again, my
Have a whole new
philosophy is
unique
that,
community, right?
yeah, and my philosophy is, that we need to use, technology, but to integrate it with the environment.
Yeah.
And what better way than to have a tiny home where you can be, basically connected with nature, but also connected to the internet and be able to do your business, but be able to go outside and enjoy the splendor of the world.
Yeah, I love it. I think you'll get all that stuff accomplished, Jason, because everybody, regardless, I mean, they might not go to prison, but everybody has hiccups. The question is how do you get back up and do it? And
Yeah.
you've got that tenacity piece that will make that happen. How do you think, looking at everything that you've gone through, what do you think's your biggest takeaway through your journey?
Resilience.
Yeah.
You can't learn it any better than when you go to prison. And I don't ever wish anybody to have that experience if they can avoid it. But for those of us who do go in, you learn that the true secret ingredient of being a human being is our resilience.
Yep.
We can overcome anything as long as we put our mind to overcoming it. There's nothing that can stop us.
That is so well said and so true. You can adapt to anything and you can overcome anything as long as you've got the right mindset to get over it and through it or around it and have your own success. Jason, it's been a great and interesting, fascinating conversation. How do people get a hold of you?
Yeah. So you can reach me. I have a website, jasonsafford.com, and I also have a business website, which is exceptionalresultsnow.com. I have all the social media there, but you can also email me at my name, jasonsafford@gmail.com. It's that simple.
And people that are watching it on YouTube, they can see it right behind you. Exceptional Results.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And, for anybody who got anything out of this, I think Jason was dropping all kinds of nuggets of wisdom. Share the show. It's
Absolutely.
the best thing. Share it. And yes,
Brent,
yes, Jason.
For those people who are in New York and New Hyde Park, I'm at UFC Gym, so they can find me at the.
They can find you right there. Exactly. Exactly. You walk on down. Yeah. Get with Jason. Let's see. If you got time, I know it's a hassle, but it's a big deal. Leave a review on Apple. Go to Nightmare Success. It says write a review. It puts the show on steroids. If you want to check out more of what I've got going on, it's BrentCassidy.com. It's with a TY, not a DY. And as I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Jason Safford, thank you so much today.
Likewise, Brent, this was awesome. Thank you so much. It's a real privilege to be here, and I really enjoyed myself.
I appreciate it.
Thank you to all your listeners.
Nightmare Success, in and out.